She fainted in front of the Alpha King. He caught her and saw the scars covering her back. At the far end of the hall, sitting atop his black obsidian throne, was the Alpha King, a man whose very presence could make the boldest knight bow and the most cunning courtier falter. His eyes were sharp, like steel catching the light, and yet there was a depth to them that hinted at unspoken sorrows, memories he carried like armor. She stepped into the hall cautiously, her feet barely making a sound on the polished marble. Her dark cloak clung to her shoulders, hiding the figure beneath, but it could not hide the aura that surrounded her, an aura of mystery, of survival, of pain. Her eyes flicked nervously across the room, meeting a few curious gazes that quickly looked away. No one knew who she truly was, or why she dared to come into the presence of the Alpha King himself. She had heard the rumors about him, that he was merciless, that his heart was locked behind walls taller than the tallest towers of the kingdom, that he punished betrayal with cruelty and rewarded loyalty with unimaginable favor. And yet, something drew her here, something she could not name. Perhaps it was hope. Perhaps it was the desperate desire to be seen, not as a victim of her past, but as someone who had survived it. As she walked forward, her vision blurred not from fear, but from the weight she carried within her. Memories pressed on her chest, heavy and relentless. She remembered cold nights where she had no one to trust, hands that had hurt her instead of helped, and a world that had seemed endless and cruel. Her breath became shallow, her legs wobbled, and she realized too late that she was about to collapse. The room seemed to tilt around her. The bright chandeliers became streaks of light, and the murmurs of the nobles turned into distant echoes. Her knees buckled, and she felt herself falling forward into the open space before the throne. She thought, in a fleeting panic, that no one would catch her in time. Then he was there. The Alpha King moved with impossible speed, stepping down from his throne with the grace of a predator and the certainty of a shield. His hands reached for her, strong and unwavering, and caught her just before she hit the cold marble floor. The contact was sudden and intimate, and for a brief moment, time itself seemed to pause. She rested in his arms, her face inches from his chest, heart hammering against her ribs as if it knew its fate hung in balance. He looked down at her and his gaze hardened, not with anger but with a fierce, almost protective curiosity. Something about her spoke to him, something buried beneath fear and fragility. Then his eyes fell to her back, exposed by the slipping cloak as he steadied her. And there they were, lines and ridges, scars that ran across her skin like a map of pain and endurance. Each one told a story he did not fully understand, but their presence stirred something deep within him. The court fell silent. Courtiers froze in place, unsure whether to look or look away. Some dared not breathe. For the first time in many years, someone had entered the hall and drawn the king's attention so fully that the ordinary rules of decorum no longer mattered. Her body trembled in his arms, not from the cold but from a mixture of fear, shame, and a strange, unnameable relief. She did not speak at first, unable to form words as the king held her steady. His fingers brushed the edges of her cloak as he adjusted her position, careful not to hurt her further. "Who are you?" His voice was deep, controlled, and yet it carried an undercurrent of something softer, almost gentle. She swallowed hard, her lips trembling. She wanted to speak, wanted to tell him everything and nothing all at once. But her throat closed with the weight of memories and unspoken stories. All that came out was a whisper, barely audible. "My name," she said. Then she faltered, the words breaking like fragile glass. "My name is Lyra." He noticed the faint tremble of her hands and the way her eyes darted to the floor, avoiding his gaze. There was a history written in every scar, in every flinch, in every silent heartbeat that pulsed against his chest. A sudden cough from a noble made her flinch again, reminding her that the world still existed outside this moment. She realized she was still in front of a full hall, watched by dozens of people who had every right to judge her. Panic threatened to rise again, and she tried to pull away from him. "Wait," he said, his hand firm on her arm. "Do not move yet." compassion that did not weaken his power but made it sharper, more compelling. He could see her past in the way she carried herself, in the hesitance of her steps, in the way she flinched at touches that were not meant to hurt. "Lyra," he said again, softer this time, "you should not be here alone. This place, it can consume you if you are not careful." The murmurs of the court grew louder, voices filled with curiosity, suspicion, and gossip. But the king ignored them, his attention entirely on her. He carried her a few steps toward a carved marble bench near the throne, setting her down with care that made her flinch at the gentleness. She noticed the way his fingers lingered a moment too long near her cloak, as if reluctant to let go. "Your scars," he murmured almost to himself. "They tell a story, but they do not define you." She tried to speak, to find some words that would explain why she was here, why she had come to this dangerous place, but the weight of her history made her lips dry and her voice falter. "Why did you come?" he asked, a question that was both simple and impossible to answer. Lyra swallowed, her mind racing. She could not tell him the truth, not yet. The truth would make her vulnerable, and vulnerability was something she had learned to bury deep inside. Instead, she gave the smallest, most careful answer she could manage. I had no choice." She wanted to tell him everything, to confess the pain and the loneliness, to admit that she had hoped he would notice her even before she fell. But the words stayed locked inside her, and all that came out was a whisper of her name. "You, Lyra," he said, his voice like the rumble of distant thunder. "You are in my court now. You are under my protection. No one will harm you while I am here." The Alpha King, so feared and so powerful, carried a presence that could crush kingdoms, yet here he was, holding her, shielding her, seeing her scars and not recoiling. For the first time in years, Lyra felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. And then the court erupted into whispers. A young noblewoman gasped, pointing toward the far end of the hall. "Did you see her back? Those scars? Speak no more of what you have seen." As the hall settled into tense silence, Lyra realized that this moment had changed everything. She had entered the palace a stranger, weighed down by fear and past pain. She now stood in the presence of a man who could destroy her with a word, yet had chosen to catch her, to hold her, to see her scars and still remain. And for the first time, she wondered if this man, the Alpha King, could also be the one who might see the woman behind the scars. She did not yet know what lay ahead, only that her life had shifted in an instant. One fall had brought her into his arms. One glimpse had revealed her secrets. And one promise had set a path she could not yet imagine, a path that would lead her into darkness, into danger, and perhaps into something far more terrifying: love. The candles flickered, shadows danced along the walls, and Lyra knew one truth above all. She had survived much before, but she had never survived this, the feeling of being truly seen. And the Alpha King, standing tall and silent in the midst of the grand hall, held her as if he knew that seeing her was only the beginning of a story that neither of them could escape. The court watched, the night deepened, and outside, the wind howled as if whispering secrets of the past and promises of what was yet to come. The moon hung low over the palace, spilling silver light through tall windows and onto the marble floors of the grand hall. The candles had been dimmed, leaving shadows stretching across the walls, as if the night itself had crept into every corner. Lyra sat on a carved bench near the throne, still trembling from the events earlier. Though the court had quieted, the memory of her fall and the exposure of her scars lingered like a shadow across her mind. The Alpha King stood before her, his presence a mixture of command and calm, like a storm contained. His eyes, sharp and deep, studied her with a focus that made her heart beat faster. The court had dispersed, leaving only a few guards lingering at the edges of the hall, but she felt as though she were still at the center of his attention, as though the world had shrunk to the space between them. "You are hurt more than your body shows," he said quietly, his voice low but steady. "Your scars are not just marks, they are history. And history carries weight. Now here, in the presence of a man who could crush kingdoms with a word, she felt suddenly exposed, vulnerable in a way she had never allowed herself to feel. I have lived, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. That is all you need to know. I need to know if you trust me. Slowly she lifted her head, meeting his eyes, and for the first time allowed herself to share a fragment of her past. I, I have survived because I had to, she began, choosing each word carefully. I had no one to protect me. I learned to hide, to fight, to endure. The world, it has not been kind. There was a weight in the room, the kind of silence that demanded honesty, and though the words were few, they carried a lifetime of pain and resilience. You are strong, he said finally, stronger than most, and yet you carry fear with you. Fear is natural, it does not make you weak. Most people had either ignored her, pitied her, or sought to take advantage of her weakness. But here, in the quiet of the night, the Alpha King spoke as if he could see the core of her being, the part she had tried to hide from the world. She began, but she could not finish. The words seemed impossible, tangled with memories she had buried deep. She could not speak of everything, not yet. The king stepped closer, his presence both commanding and gentle. Then show me in your actions, he said, his tone firm but not harsh. I will not demand your story, I will earn your trust. Suddenly the quiet was broken by a sharp noise at the door. A guard's voice called out, tense and hurried. Your Majesty, there is a disturbance near the northern gates. Someone is trying to enter the palace. Lyra rose to follow, though he did not notice her at first, his focus on the threat beyond the walls. You cannot leave here, he said, his eyes briefly meeting hers. Stay, do not interfere. From her vantage point, she saw him command the guards with a mix of authority and precision, his movements both swift and deliberate. There was a fluidity to him, a natural leadership that demanded obedience, yet he did not strike recklessly. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The tension in the air was thick, and Lyra's heart pounded with fear and anticipation. Then a figure appeared near the northern gates, a shadowy silhouette moving with purpose and stealth. The guards raised their weapons, but the figure advanced with confidence, unafraid. Lyra's breath caught. There was something familiar about the way the figure moved, a memory that gnawed at the edges of her mind. Her past, the scars she carried, and the threats she had long feared, all converged in that one dark shape. The king emerged from the fray, his presence magnetic and commanding. He confronted the shadow, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the intruder. Who are you? He demanded, his voice carrying the weight of the throne itself. The figure paused, just long enough for Lyra to recognize a symbol etched into their clothing, a symbol from the past she had tried desperately to forget. Her knees nearly buckled. This was no ordinary intruder. This was someone who had haunted her, someone who had caused the scars she bore, someone who would not let her escape her history. The guards hesitated, sensing the tension between the king and the shadow. Lyra wanted to run forward to intervene, but she knew that she could do nothing. Her past had returned, and the king now faced it alongside her. The figure spoke, voice low and chilling. You hide her well, your majesty, but she belongs to the shadows, not your throne. The shadow studied the king, then slowly retreated, melting back into the darkness as if it had never been there. Lyra exhaled, relief and fear mingling in equal measure. Her heart raced not just from the danger, but from the realization that the king had risked himself to defend her, to confront the remnants of her past. For the first time, she understood that his interest in her was not fleeting curiosity. He saw her scars, her history, and chose to protect her anyway. The king returned to her side, his gaze softening as he approached. Are you unharmed? He asked, though his eyes searched hers for more than just physical safety. Lyra nodded, struggling to form words. Yes, thanks to you. Lyra noticed the way the king's cloak brushed against her, the way his presence seemed to shield her from every corner of the room. There was power in him, yes, but also a tenderness she had not expected. Lyra, he said, his voice low, almost hesitant, I will need you to tell me more. Not everything, but enough to understand, enough to protect you properly. But you must trust me as much as you can. The night deepened, and the palace seemed to grow quieter, as if the world itself had paused to watch the strange bond forming between them. Lyra sat on the bench, and the king remained nearby, a silent sentinel. She was exhausted not from the events themselves, but from the flood of emotion, the collision of fear, hope, and the unfamiliar comfort of being seen. Then, just as she began to feel a tentative sense of safety, a sound echoed through the halls, a whisper, a shadow, a memory returning to life. Lyra's eyes widened, and the king's hand moved instinctively toward hers, ready to protect. The past was not finished with her. And the night was far from over. The palace walls seemed colder that night, the moonlight casting long, jagged shadows that twisted like dark fingers across the floors. Lyra could not shake the memory of the shadow that had appeared near the northern gates, the figure that belonged to her past. Every nerve in her body ached with tension, but she forced herself to remain calm, hiding the tremble in her hands. The Alpha King had ordered the guards to patrol the palace more thoroughly, and he himself remained close to her side, his presence a steadying force. There was a weight to him, a command that made even the restless shadows hesitate. He did not speak much, but Lyra could feel his eyes on her constantly, as if measuring the distance between her past and the fragile present they were trying to build together. "Lyra," he said finally, his voice breaking the silence, "you cannot hide your scars from me. I have seen them, yes, but there is more than just the marks themselves. There is a story behind each one, and I wish to understand." She began, then stopped, struggling for words. Her mind raced through fragmented memories, cold nights alone, the sound of footsteps that were never kind, the hands that left more than scars, the endless fear. "I cannot, not yet," she whispered. He stepped closer, the air between them thick with intensity. "Then show me," he said softly. "Show me the strength you have built from your pain. You do not need to speak at all. Let me see it in you." She took a deep breath, letting the words remain unspoken for now, and followed him to the royal gardens. The night air was cool, scented with jasmine and wet earth. Shadows stretched along the paths, illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. Here, away from the watchful eyes of the court, there was a chance for honesty, a chance to reveal herself without the fear of ridicule or judgment. "Sit," he said, motioning to a stone bench. His gaze lingered on her as she lowered herself onto it, shoulders tense, hands gripping her cloak. "Tell me what you can. I do not need every detail, only what you are ready to share." Slowly she began, her voice soft but steady. I was not born into kindness," she said. "I learned early that the world is not gentle. People can hurt, and they often do. I survived because I had to. I hid myself, I ran when I needed to, and I fought when I could not run. And the scars, they are all that remains of those battles I could not escape. It shapes you, yes, but it also gives you strength that few can understand. And that is what I see in you." She had spent her life avoiding attention, hiding, and yet here was a man who saw her for what she truly was, not weak, not fragile, but resilient and unbroken in ways even she did not fully understand. A soft breeze rustled the leaves, and for a moment the world seemed suspended. Shadows danced across her face, and she wondered if he could see not only her scars but the memories etched into her soul. She started, then paused again. The king reached out, gently taking her hand. The contact was electric, yet grounding. His hand was warm, strong, and it made her feel anchored in a world that had always felt uncertain. "You do not need to speak at all tonight," he said. "Let your presence here be enough. Let me learn you slowly, piece by piece." A sudden rustle from the edge of the garden made them both tense. The Alpha King's hand tightened around hers, his senses alert, and Lyra's heart skipped a beat. Could it be the shadow from before, the figure that haunted her past? She could not bear the thought of facing it again, not here, not now. But the figure did not emerge from the darkness. Instead, it was one of the palace guards, returning with news that made the king's eyes darken. "Your Majesty," the guard said, bowing low. "The northern gates, someone attempted to breach them again. It seems the threat is not finished." The king stood slowly, his posture radiating authority, and motioned for the guard to follow him. "You must stay here," he said, his gaze returning to hers. "No one will harm you, but you cannot face this alone." She wanted to prove that she was not just someone to be protected, that her strength could stand shoulder to shoulder with his. But she obeyed, stepping back into the shadowed path of the garden. The king moved with purpose, and she watched him disappear into the darkness toward the northern gates. Her mind raced with fragments of memory, with the shadow of the figure she had once feared, with the scars that still burned with pain whenever she remembered the past. She had survived so much alone, and yet now she felt the strange, almost dizzying sense of being cared for, of being seen. After a long moment, she moved to follow, quietly, staying just out of sight. She could not fully explain why she did it. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps curiosity, or perhaps something more, an instinct that told her that she could not remain entirely apart from him, not when the danger was tied so closely to her own history. The moonlight guided her steps as she approached the northern walls. She could see the guards moving cautiously, weapons drawn, and then she saw him, the king, standing before the shadowy figure. The tension was almost unbearable, the air thick with threat and command. She could feel the echoes of her past converging in this moment, and a wave of fear mixed with awe washed over her. The figure spoke, low and deliberate, and Lyra's breath caught. She recognized the tone, the cadence, the memory of fear it brought back. Her past was alive, and it was here, challenging the present she had only just begun to trust. "You hide her well, Your Majesty," the shadow said, "but she cannot escape what she is. She chooses her own path now, and I will not allow you to take her from it." The king returned to her side, his presence once again a shield against the unknown. "You should not have followed me," he said quietly, though his tone lacked anger. "It is not safe for you to be in the open like that." "You are brave," he said, "braver than you realize, but bravery alone cannot protect you from what waits in the shadows. That is why you must trust me and allow me to keep you safe." And yet here was a man asking for a partnership of both, asking her to allow herself to be seen, to be protected, and perhaps to begin believing that she was worthy of care. As they returned to the palace, the night seemed to shift. The shadows receded slightly under the pale moonlight, the threat momentarily gone, and yet Lyra knew that her past was never truly gone. It lingered, a reminder that survival required vigilance. But for the first time she felt a flicker of something new, hope, fragile and trembling, yet undeniably real. The king walked beside her, silent, but his presence spoke volumes. They had faced the past together tonight, and though the danger had not fully vanished, they had survived it side by side. And in that survival, Lyra realized something she had not allowed herself to hope for, that perhaps she did not have to face the shadows alone anymore. The first light of dawn crept across the palace, casting a pale glow over the stone walls and flickering banners. The night had left its mark, shadows lingered in the corners, and the tension of what had occurred near the northern gates hung in the air like a heavy fog. Lyra could still feel it, a prickling awareness of danger, reminding her that her past was never far behind. The Alpha King stood in the courtyard, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun. His expression was grave yet calm, as he addressed the guards with quiet authority. Every movement, every word radiated strength and precision. He had faced threats before, but there was something different tonight, something that tied danger to the fragile woman who had captured his attention and his heart. Lyra watched from a distance, hidden behind a column, her cloak drawn tightly around her. She felt a strange mixture of fear and pride. Fear because the past she had tried to leave behind had returned with determination, and pride because the man she had come to trust had chosen to face it, not as a king, but as a protector. "You must stay within the palace walls," he said, his voice firm but gentle, directed to her without turning fully. "Do not attempt to intervene. Your safety is paramount." She had spent her life fighting alone, surviving by her own strength, and now it felt impossible to accept that someone else could fight for her. And yet, she wanted to believe in the security of his presence. The guards moved with coordinated precision, forming lines along the walls and gates. Every sense of the Alpha King was alert, watching, predicting, commanding. And still, Lyra felt a strange pull, an urge to be closer, to witness the strength he wielded not as a tyrant, but as a shield. The shadow from the night before had vanished, but Lyra could feel it still, lurking at the edges of memory. Someone from her past had returned, and she knew that no amount of walls or guards could keep them from finding her if they were determined. Her scars, the history they represented, made her a target, and yet here was a man who did not recoil, who did not shy from the truth of her past, who had chosen to stand with her. Suddenly, a cry echoed through the courtyard. Lyra's heart jumped, and she moved instinctively toward the sound, only to be stopped by a firm hand on her shoulder. The Alpha King had appeared beside her, silent as a shadow. His grip was firm, protective. "Do not move," he commanded softly. "It is not safe." She could feel his strength, a steady pulse of certainty that seemed to anchor her own trembling heart. The source of the cry became clear moments later. A group of palace servants had discovered a trap set near the gates, something meant to harm anyone who approached. The Alpha King moved swiftly, assessing the threat with a careful eye, issuing commands to disarm it. His movements were precise, calculated, yet fluid, like a dance of power and control. Lyra watched, mesmerized by the way he balanced authority and care, by the way he protected without striking fear into those around him. After the trap was neutralized, the king returned his attention to her. "You see," he said quietly, "even in the face of danger, we must remain calm. Panic only serves the shadows." It was not fear alone, nor relief, nor admiration. It was all of these, intertwined with something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken even as she fought to steady her breath. "We cannot stay here," he said, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "The palace is no longer safe for you. You are a target because of who you were and because of what you have survived. We must leave, if only temporarily." Her voice was steady, though her hands shook slightly. "If you believe it is safer, I will trust you." Supplies were gathered, and secret routes through the palace and beyond were chosen, paths known only to the king and a few of his most trusted aides. Lyra followed closely, each step a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She had never left the palace walls willingly, never with someone she trusted to guide her, and the realization filled her with a strange, fragile hope. The journey began in silence, broken only by the soft sounds of footsteps and the occasional whisper of the guards. The moonlight cast long shadows along the path as they made their way through hidden corridors and side passages. Every turn, every archway, was a reminder of the danger that lingered, yet also of the growing bond between Lyra and the Alpha King. At last they reached the edge of the kingdom, where the mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky. Here, the Alpha King had prepared a hidden fortress, a place untouched by court intrigue and outside threats, where the world could not easily reach them. The fortress was ancient, built from stone and hidden in a natural hollow of the mountains. Its walls were thick and its gates nearly invisible from a distance. "This place will keep you safe," he said, his eyes scanning the surrounding landscape. "At least for now." The first night in the fortress was quiet but tense. The king had arranged a room for her, separate from his own, though close enough that she could hear his presence nearby. She unpacked a few belongings, her movements careful and deliberate, trying to calm the storm of thoughts in her mind. Her past was not done with her, and the memory of the shadowy figure lingered like a thorn in her heart. The Alpha King entered the room quietly, standing near the doorway. "I need to know more," he said gently. "Not everything, but enough so that I can help you face what comes next." And yet the presence of the king, his unwavering calm, his protective authority made it possible. Slowly she began to speak. "My childhood was not easy," she began. "I was taken from the life I knew. I was alone. People used their power to hurt me, to control me. I had to survive in ways no one should ever need to. These scars," she said, touching her back lightly where the cloak had slipped, "are reminders. They are reminders of the battles I could not avoid. And that makes you stronger than most. But strength alone is not enough. You must learn to trust, to allow someone to stand with you. That is what I am offering." Before she could respond, a sudden noise shattered the quiet, a movement in the shadows outside the fortress. The Alpha King's hand moved instinctively to the hilt of his sword, and his eyes narrowed. Lyra's heart jumped. The danger had followed them, had not been deterred by walls or mountains. The guards moved swiftly, forming a protective circle around the fortress. The Alpha King's gaze swept over the surroundings, calculating, commanding, ready. Lyra felt her pulse quicken, but for the first time she did not feel entirely alone. The man beside her, the Alpha King, was ready to face whatever came, and she knew he would not falter. Hours passed with tense vigilance. The threat remained unseen, but its presence was felt, like a shadow lingering at the edges of the mind. Lyra could feel her courage growing, fueled not only by fear but by the quiet strength of the man who had chosen to stand with her. By the time dawn began to break, the first rays of sunlight spilling across the fortress walls, Lyra realized something important. She was not just a survivor anymore. She was a fighter, and she was no longer alone. The Alpha King had shown her that strength could come not only from enduring alone, but from allowing someone else to share the burden. And yet she knew that the trials were far from over. The shadow of her past still loomed, and the fortress, for all its strength, could only delay the inevitable confrontation. The fortress stood silent, bathed in the pale morning light. Its stone walls, cold and unyielding, had kept Lyra and the Alpha King safe through the night, but the quiet felt fragile. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves carried the weight of anticipation. They both knew the past was not finished with her. It had followed them here, persistent and relentless. Lyra rose early, the memory of the figure who had arrived at the gate still heavy in her mind. Her scars itched, not physically, but as a reminder of the battles she had endured and the vulnerability she had once tried to bury. She moved quietly to the window, gazing at the distant mountains that glimmered under the rising sun. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the mixture of fear and hope that the Alpha King had awakened in her. "You are thinking too deeply," a voice said behind her. The Alpha King stepped into the room, his presence filling the space with quiet authority. He did not touch her, but the way he stood there, calm and assured, made her feel protected. "I am trying to be ready," she replied softly. "I cannot ignore what comes next. You have survived everything until now because you prepared yourself. But today, you will see that strength is not only in endurance. Strength is in trust and in letting someone stand with you." He had faced countless battles, ruled kingdoms, and commanded armies, yet here he was, focused on her, willing to face dangers not for glory or power, but to protect her, to earn her trust. A sudden sound at the gate drew their attention. The Alpha King's hand moved instinctively to the hilt of his sword. Lyra's heart pounded, but she did not move away. Something in her chest urged her to face this moment, to stand beside him, even if only in spirit. The figure from her past stepped into view, their cloak dark against the fortress walls. Confidence radiated from them, but so did recognition, an understanding of the challenge that lay before them. They had come to claim her, to force her to confront the history she had long hidden. The Alpha King advanced, his posture commanding and precise. "You will not take her," he said, voice resonant and unwavering. "Not now, not ever." She had feared this confrontation for years, and now, with the king standing before her, she understood that she was not powerless. "You are stronger than I expected," the figure said, voice low and deliberate. But she belongs to the past, not your throne, and I will not let you define her life." The king was not only defending her body but her very right to live free from the chains of her past. Her own fear mingled with awe. This man, whose presence had become her anchor, was willing to face not just the physical danger, but the emotional weight of her history. And in that moment she realized that her past, as painful as it had been, had led her here, into the care of someone who saw her scars not as flaws but as testimony to her strength. The battle was swift but intense. The figure underestimated the Alpha King's resolve and skill. With a series of precise movements, the threat was neutralized, not by cruelty, but by mastery and control. The figure, realizing defeat, retreated into the shadows, leaving behind only a whisper of threat and memory. Lyra's legs weakened, and she sank to the stone floor, trembling not from exhaustion but from relief. The king knelt beside her, his hand reaching for hers. "You are safe," he said softly. "The danger is gone, at least for now. But more than that, you are not alone." She began, voice breaking. "I never thought someone could care so much. I see you, Lyra, not just your scars, but your heart." The Alpha King helped her to her feet, and together they walked through the fortress, the sunlight spilling over the walls and into the halls. Each step was a testament to survival, courage, and a newfound bond. The palace, the shadows, the threats, they no longer defined her. With him she had found a sanctuary, not just of stone and protection, but of trust and emotional safety. In the quiet of the fortress, Lyra allowed herself to speak again. I want to try, to trust, to believe that I can be more than just the past. And when the shadows return, as they always do, we will face them together." Days passed in the fortress, each one a careful balance of training, preparation, and moments of quiet connection. The Alpha King taught her to defend herself, not merely as a shielded prey, but as a fighter capable of standing alongside him. Each lesson was not only physical but emotional, teaching her to trust, to act with confidence, and to embrace her strength. Lyra felt her confidence grow. The scars that had once been a source of shame now reminded her of her resilience. And in the presence of the king, she began to see that they were not just marks of pain, but marks of victory, survival, and the courage to endure. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting the fortress in golden light, Lyra and the king stood atop the highest tower, looking out over the kingdom. The wind played with their hair, and for a moment the world felt still. "You have changed," the king said softly, his hand brushing hers. "Not because of me, but because of yourself. You have faced your past, your fears, and your scars, and you have come through stronger. That is why I trust you, and why I am proud to stand with you. I could not have done it alone." Lyra realized that she was no longer merely surviving. She was living, truly living, and for the first time she felt the possibility of joy, hope, and connection. Night fell, and with it came the quiet reassurance of safety. The Alpha King and Lyra stood close, their shoulders brushing, the unspoken understanding between them deeper than words. They had faced the shadows together, endured trials, and emerged stronger, not just as protector and ward, but as equals, bound by trust, respect, and a fragile, growing affection. And as the stars began to shimmer above the fortress, Lyra finally allowed herself to hope, not for a life without challenges, but for a life where she would not face them alone. Where her scars, her past, and her strength could be seen, honored, and embraced by someone who truly understood. For the first time, she felt the dawn of a new life, a life where she could stand in the sunlight, her scars visible, her heart open, and know that she was not alone. The Alpha King stood beside her, and in that presence she found the courage to believe in herself, in him, and in the possibility of a future unshaped by fear. The fortress was silent, the danger momentarily gone, and the world beyond waited. But Lyra and the Alpha King knew one truth above all: whatever shadows came, whatever trials awaited, they would face them together. And in that unity there was strength, hope, and the quiet promise of love.